I did not use line breaks and avoided special symbols except normal punctuation. I arrived at my father's backyard just after 5 in the evening, still wearing the plain jeans and soft cotton shirt I kept folded in my locker at Fort Cavazos for days when I needed to pass as a civilian. The July heat in Killeen felt like it wrapped itself around my ribs and squeezed, but the real pressure came the moment I stepped through the gate and heard the familiar blend of country music beer cans snapping open and voices that carried more pride than kindness. Everyone was already gathered around long folding tables covered with plastic flags. Stepmom Linda was in the center holding court with the same bright smile she used whenever she needed an audience. She spotted me in an instant. "Captain Rowan is here," she announced, though her tone twisted the word captain into something closer to a joke. Before I could reply, she threw an arm around Ethan, her son, the man she called her pride, her real soldier someday. Ethan Blake stood beside her in a sleeveless shirt that showcased every hour he had spent lifting weights instead of doing anything useful. He raised his beer and smirked at me. "Captain, you seriously, I thought they had you pushing forms in an air-conditioned room." The people around him laughed loud and eager, the kind of laughter meant to prove they were on the winning side of a joke. I felt the burn of it under my skin. Years of deployments and long nights in the cockpit had taught me to keep my face still, no matter what, but my pulse kicked against my ribs. "Desk work does not count, sweet," Rowan Ethan added. "Real soldiers do the heavy lifting." Stepmom Linda chuckled and patted his arm as if he had just delivered a perfect toast. I moved toward the table to grab a plate, but Ethan stepped directly into my path. "Careful," he said quietly. "Do not bump into me, Captain Barbie." The words were soft but pointed, and I felt them hit harder than the Texas heat. I stepped back without giving him the satisfaction of a reaction. It had always been like this. Silence kept the peace, or at least that was what I told myself. I reached again for the food, focused on steady breathing, the way I had been trained to do in a helicopter under stress. But the patio tiles were wet, slick with spilled beer. My boot caught on a tipped can. The world tilted. The concrete step rushed up to meet me. Pain exploded across my side, sharp and immediate, a sensation so close to the rotor impact I had taken years earlier that for a moment I could not tell which memory belonged to the past and which belonged to now. The crowd gasped, but no one moved. I heard Linda laugh first, high-pitched and careless. "Oh, grow up, Rowan. You are not that fragile." Her words floated above me like a judgment passed down from someone who had never carried a rucksack or flown evac missions in the dark. I tried to push myself up, but the pain knifed through my ribs and stole the air from my lungs. My vision blurred. A voice from somewhere behind me whispered, "That fall was not normal." Ethan stood over me, beer still in hand, shaking his head with theatrical disappointment. "Some captain you are." The pressure in my chest grew tight. I tasted the metallic tang of panic, not fear, but the body's instinct to protect itself when something deep inside has gone wrong. I dragged in a breath, but it came thin and broken. People stared, but stayed rooted to their seats. No one wanted to challenge Linda. No one wanted to make the golden boy look bad. A neighbor I did not recognize edged closer, phone in hand. "Should I call someone?" he asked, his voice trembling. Before I could answer, the world dimmed around the edges. I heard myself trying to inhale and failing. The pain spread like fire from my ribs to my back. I felt the cold bite of the concrete seeping through my shirt. Then a siren wailed in the distance, growing louder, cutting through the static of whispers and gossip. Red and blue lights flashed across the patio as paramedics rushed through the gate. One knelt beside me. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Are you Army? Your dog tags say aviation. What happened here?" His question hung in the heavy Texas air. 30 silent faces shifted away. Ethan swallowed hard. Linda folded her arms, eyes hard, daring anyone to contradict her version of the evening. I wanted to answer, but the words stuck behind the pain. The paramedic checked my pulse, then looked sharply at the crowd. "Someone tell me what happened." I stared up at the sky, the sunset blurring into streaks of orange and red. I felt the truth rising in my chest along with the struggle for breath. This was the moment everything began to break. I grew up in a house where silence was supposed to mean strength, though most days it felt more like surrender. My earliest memories were of watching my father lace his boots before dawn, the soft clink of metal buckles echoing through our small home on the outskirts of Temple, Texas. He was an army man down to the bone, steady and disciplined, a man whose presence filled every doorway even when he barely spoke. My mother balanced him warm and gentle, the kind of woman who placed a hand on my shoulder whenever the world felt too loud. She died when I was 12, a sharp shock that tore the center out of both our lives. My father buried himself in the routine of duty-long shifts and quiet evenings spent staring at paperwork he did not need to finish. I learned early that grief has no language in a military household. You carry it the way you carry a rucksack. You do not complain. When I was 14, my father remarried. Linda moved into our home with the confidence of someone who believed she was doing us a favor simply by existing. She brought her son Ethan, then 9 years old, a boy with a loud voice and a quick temper. She praised him for every minor accomplishment and corrected me for every imagined flaw. Over time, the imbalance hardened into something sharper. If Ethan spilled a drink, it was an accident. If I dropped a cup, it was carelessness. If Ethan raised his voice, it was personality. If I spoke firmly, it was disrespect. My father did not notice how the axis of the family shifted. Or maybe he noticed and chose the easier path of quiet acceptance. Either way, I learned fast. Silence made things smoother. Silence kept the house functioning. Silence kept Linda smiling, and when Linda smiled, my father seemed less tired. So I swallowed what I needed to say. I let myself disappear around the edges of the family Linda built. By the time I turned 18, I was counting the days until I could breathe without feeling watched. College was an option, but I wanted distance that no campus could give me. I wanted structure. I wanted a place where my voice mattered. The Army offered me all three. I signed up for Army aviation because I had spent my whole life grounded. The idea of flying, of lifting above everything familiar and painful, felt like the purest form of escape. Training was brutal but honest. When you are exhausted in the cockpit simulator, no one cares about your past, only your performance. When you learn to trust the weight of a Black Hawk beneath you, you understand what responsibility feels like. During deployment in Iraq from late 2015 through 2016, I learned more about who I was than in the 20 years before it. I flew evac missions under night vision, the blades thundering overhead as sandstorms ripped across the base. There was one mission that never left me. A small convoy had been hit, casualties scattered across a road, lit only by burning debris. As we descended, the rotor wash kicked up a storm of sand and metal fragments. A stray piece struck the side of the aircraft with a force that shook the entire cabin. For a moment, I believed the world would split apart. But training took over. Hands steady, voice calm. Measure the wind. Hold the line. We lifted the wounded out one by one, the weight of them pressing into every hour of sleep I lost afterward. I came home changed. Not hardened, but reshaped like steel forced through fire. But my family did not understand any of it. Linda called my deployment a phase. Ethan told people I flew circles over safe zones. At family gatherings, they praised service members on TV while talking over me. They preferred the version of me that stayed quiet, the girl who did not disrupt the hierarchy Linda curated. They did not know that silence in combat keeps you alive, but silence at home can kill your spirit. Over the years, I stopped trying to explain. Every time I opened my mouth, Linda found a way to minimize what I said. Every time I straightened my back, Ethan saw it as a challenge. I convinced myself that staying calm maintained the peace, even though peace built on fear or control is not peace at all. As I rose through the ranks, earning my captain bars, their dismissiveness grew sharper. Ethan joked that my uniform was just a costume. Linda told neighbors that I mostly handled paperwork. My father remained the still point in all of it, offering small nods, soft agreement, but little else. He was tired. He was worn down by the years. And I, out of some misplaced loyalty, kept myself contained for his sake. But the thing about silence is that it stacks. It layers over every moment until the weight of unspoken truth becomes too heavy to carry. I did not know it then, but the fall at the BBQ was not just a fall. It was the moment the years of suppressed hurt met the force of one careless shove. It was the moment the balance of silence finally shifted. It was the beginning of the end of everything I had tried so hard to hold together. Returning to that backyard after all those years in uniform felt like stepping into a world where nothing I had earned mattered. The air smelled of charcoal and cheap beer, and the conversations buzzed around me with the same old rhythm of judgment wrapped in politeness. I moved slowly, careful with my still aching ribs, though no one noticed or cared. Linda stood near the grill, fanning smoke away from her face, as if the entire gathering depended on her elegance. The moment she saw me approach, she offered a smile that never reached her eyes. "Our captain is back," she announced brightly, voice lilting with a mock admiration that stung more than open laughter. Or should I say paper captain? The words slid into the space between us like a blade disguised as a compliment. A few people smirked behind their drinks, unsure whether to laugh or stay quiet. The ones who stayed quiet looked at me with that mix of pity and discomfort I had seen 1,000 times. The kind of expression people use when they want to care but do not want to get involved. Ethan stepped into the circle of attention as naturally as someone stepping onto a stage built entirely for him. He wore a tight shirt that clung to every muscle he had spent the past 5 years sculpting in the gym. His biceps bulged as he adjusted the grill tongs with a flourish, waiting for someone to comment. Linda touched his arm proudly. "Look at my boy," she said. "That is real discipline. He works harder than anyone here." The implication hung in the air. Harder than me. Harder than the woman who had flown evac missions through sandstorms on the other side of the world. Harder than the daughter who had come home with scars she covered beneath perfectly pressed uniforms. Ethan flexed subtly as he set down the tongs. He turned toward me with a grin that told me he had been waiting for this moment. "Not everyone can handle real training, Rowan. Some people are just built for paperwork." A small wave of laughter rippled around us. I kept my jaw tight and my breath steady the way I had learned to do in the cockpit when turbulence hit and panic tried to claw its way up my throat. My silence only emboldened him. He grabbed a cold beer from the cooler, popped the tab, and lifted it high. "To real soldiers," he said loudly, "like me someday." The crowd cheered, clinking drinks, thrilled to be included in the performance. The words punched through me harder than the fall on the concrete steps. Real soldiers. As if the uniform I had earned meant less than a gym membership. As if the hours I had flown counted for nothing because I did not announce my strength in the same volume he used to announce his. I felt my teeth press together, a slow, grinding pressure that reached up into my temples. I wanted to speak. I wanted to tell them about the rotor strike in Iraq that nearly tore the aircraft apart. I wanted to remind Ethan that soldiers are measured by grit, not glamour, by actions, not theatrics. But I had spent my entire adulthood swallowing words to keep the peace, and that habit did not break easily. So I said nothing. Ethan took my silence as permission. He leaned against the cooler with a casual arrogance that made my chest tighten. "Come on, Rowan," he said. "Loosen up. You know you do not have to pretend around us." "Pretend?" Another word with teeth. People drifted closer, drawn to tension the way moths are drawn to light. Some watched with amusement, others with unease, and a few with thinly veiled superiority as if they believed I had brought this humiliation upon myself by choosing to come home at all. I could feel the old patterns closing around me. Linda's bright fake sweetness, Ethan's swagger, the crowd's eager laughter, my own conditioned stillness. I stood there listening to them applaud Ethan's imaginary future while dismissing every hard-earned part of my past. The tension tightened like a rope pulled from both ends. I squeezed the plastic cup in my hand until it bent. Ethan saw it and smiled, pleased with himself, pleased that he could still pull me into his shadow with nothing but a few careless words. He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough so only the nearest few could hear. "It is cute that you keep wearing that captain title around here, Rowan, but we all know who the real tough one in the family is." He tapped his chest with 2 fingers, slow and smug. "Right here." I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet, but a deep tiredness that reached all the way to the years I had spent trying to prove myself to people who were never ready to see me. I forced a slow breath through my nose. The backyard blurred into 2 worlds. One, where Ethan stood basking in attention he had not earned, and another where I stood silent waiting for a moment I did not yet realize was coming. The tension climbed so high the air felt heavy. Something inside me whispered that the breaking point was near, that the imbalance of all these years was about to collapse under its own weight. I did not know how soon that moment would arrive, but the rope was straining, and it would not hold much longer. I tried to step away before Ethan could twist any more words into weapons, but he shifted his stance just enough to block my path again. His shoulder brushed mine light enough that he could later claim it was an accident, firm enough that I felt the intentional edge behind it. I moved to pass a second time. That was when he did it, a small push. Barely more than a nudge, but perfectly timed, perfectly placed, aimed at the moment my foot hovered over the slick patio tile still coated with spilled beer. My heel slid across the wet surface. The world tilted. I reached for balance, but my hand caught only hot air and the faint sting of humiliation rising in my chest. My other foot struck a tipped-over beer can, the metal rolling beneath me with a hollow clatter that echoed louder than anyone's laughter. Then, gravity took over. My body snapped downward, ribs slamming into the sharp corner of the concrete step. The impact was brutal, immediate, and absolute. Pain ripped through my side like something tearing open from the inside. My breath vanished in a single shocked gasp. For a moment, everything froze except the ringing in my ears. I could feel the patio beneath my cheek warm from the fading sunlight. I tried to inhale, but the breath came thin and ragged, broken by a stabbing sensation that pulsed with each attempt. My mind flashed back to Iraq, to that rotor strike that had rattled the aircraft and sent a jolt through my chest so fierce I thought my ribs had snapped back then. The sensation was too familiar, too close. A fear I had buried years ago clawed its way up through the pain. Something was wrong, something deep. And no one moved. From above me, Linda's voice cut through the dazed silence, sharp and irritated, as if I had deliberately inconvenienced her. "Stop being dramatic, Rowan. You are embarrassing us." Embarrassing. The word stabbed deeper than the cement. I tried to push myself upright, but my body refused. My ribs screamed white-hot and merciless. The air in my lungs thinned again, shrinking down to a narrow, burning tunnel. A few relatives exchanged uncomfortable looks, but stayed rooted to their spots, unwilling to challenge Linda, unwilling to admit they had watched me fall and done nothing. Ethan towered over me, beer in hand, smirking as he shook his head. "Some captain you are." His tone held amusement, not concern. He had seen exactly what he wanted to see. Me on the ground, him above me, his victory. I swallowed hard, trying to steady the rising panic, but the pain sharpened with every weak breath. My chest felt tight, constricted, as if an invisible fist squeezed each inhale into something smaller and weaker than the last. I could not hide the tremor in my fingers. The world wavered slightly, colors bleeding into each other at the edges. Someone in the crowd murmured, "That did not look right," but their voice faded when Linda shot them a warning glance. She stepped closer, not to help, but to ensure everyone stayed silent. Her arms folded across her chest, her expression tightening into the familiar mask of irritation she wore whenever I threatened the image she tried to protect. "Get up, Rowan. Honestly, you love making a scene." I tried again to breathe. A sharp snap of pain lit up my ribs like a flare. Something inside felt loose, shifting in ways it should not. My body folded around the ache, desperate for relief that refused to come. Finally, a neighbor I did not recognize stepped forward, worry etched across his face. "Should someone call someone?" he asked quietly. But Ethan snorted. "She is fine. She exaggerates everything." The words rolled over me like another shove. My ribs throbbed, my chest tightened, my lungs dragged in air that never seemed to reach full capacity. Fine was the last thing I was. The neighbor hesitated, then he dialed. I heard the faint beep of numbers pressed on a phone, and then his voice steady but concerned. "Yes, emergency. There was a fall. She is not breathing right. I am not sure what happened, but she needs help." For the first time, the backyard fell into true silence. It was not kindness. It was fear of consequences, fear that someone outside the family had noticed the cruelty they had chosen to ignore. Ethan's jaw clenched. Linda's eyes narrowed. She muttered under her breath, "You have got to be kidding me." As if my pain were an inconvenience, as if calling for help was an act of betrayal. My vision blurred again, the edges going soft. The noise of the party felt distant, muffled, as if I were underwater. I felt a cool breeze brush across my skin, carrying the smell of barbecue smoke and cut grass. It should have been comforting. Instead, it made the suffocation feel sharper. My breath hitched. My ribs screamed. I closed my eyes for a moment, not to escape, but to gather what strength I had left. I could hear footsteps rushing down the side gate, a voice calling out from a distance, sirens approaching. Red and blue lights flickered across the edges of my vision. The first paramedic knelt beside me, his presence firm and urgent. "Ma'am, can you hear me? What happened?" His hand hovered near my shoulder but did not touch, waiting for my response. Ethan answered before I could breathe enough to speak. "She slipped. She is clumsy. That is all." The paramedic ignored him and leaned closer to me. "Ma'am, can you take a deep breath for me?" I tried. The attempt broke into a sharp jolt of pain that forced a strained, choking gasp from my throat. The paramedic's expression shifted instantly. He looked up at the crowd, his voice dropping into something heavier. "Someone tell me exactly what happened." But no one spoke. And in that silence, in that heavy, crushing moment, I felt the truth of my world settle into place. They were willing to let me suffer rather than admit what they had done. And everything inside me began to break open. The ride to Carl R. Darnall Army Medical Center blurred into a haze of pain and flashing lights. Every bump in the road sent a shock through my ribs, a deep, stabbing jolt that made my breath stumble. The paramedic beside me kept one hand braced near my shoulder, steady and calm, his voice cutting through the static of sirens. "Possible rib fracture, struggling to breathe. We need imaging on arrival." He spoke into the radio with the crisp clarity of someone who had done this 1,000 times. He asked me questions, simple ones, but each answer required more breath than my body could give. By the time they rolled me through the ER bay, my lungs felt tight, my chest stiff as if a band were wrapped around me and pulled tighter every minute. The brightness inside the military ER hit my eyes like a spotlight. Everything smelled of antiseptic and cool, recycled air. Nurses moved with fast precision, scanning my vitals, lifting my arm for IV access, placing monitors with practiced efficiency. A young nurse reached to adjust my dog tags, pushing them aside to clear the area around my collarbone. Her hand froze. "Aviation," she murmured. She glanced toward the attending physician with a silent message in her eyes. Not just a routine fall. The attending stepped closer, his expression shifting from routine urgency to something sharper. His gaze landed on the patch still faintly visible on the undershirt I wore beneath my civilian clothes, the insignia I had not bothered to remove. He nodded to the team. "Treat as priority. She is Army Aviation." Their movements accelerated instantly. They lifted me onto a hospital bed, wheeled me toward radiology voices overlapping in clipped medical language. I heard fragments. Decreased breath sounds on the left. Possible flail segment. Guarding at ribs. History of prior trauma. My heart pounded against bruised bone as they slid me into the CT scanner. The hum of the machine vibrated through my spine. I closed my eyes, and in the dark behind my eyelids, I saw Iraq again. The flash of the rotor strike, the shudder of metal. The way my ribs had felt back then, like someone had driven a hammer into my chest. I had recovered, but never fully forgotten. Some injuries stay with you even when you pretend they do not. When the scan finished, they wheeled me back to a curtained bay in the ER. I could feel the tension in the room before anyone spoke. The doctor returned with a tablet in hand, his brow furrowed. "Captain Blake," he said, voice steady but grave, "we found a cracked rib. Not a full break, but close. You are also showing bruising consistent with a previous injury, likely aggravated by whatever happened tonight." The words settled heavy in my stomach. Cracked rib. Old injury triggered again. My breath hitched not just from pain, but from the weight of everything implied beneath his calm tone. The doctor pulled the curtain closed and stepped closer. He lowered his voice. I need you to tell me exactly what caused your fall. This does not look like a simple slip. His eyes were steady, trained at the gaze of someone who had seen more than enough real trauma to know when a story did not add up. I opened my mouth. The truth sat in my throat like a stone. Images flashed through my mind in sharp succession. Ethan's hand on my shoulder, the slick tile, the fall, Linda's laughter, the crowd's silence, and then the familiar tightening in my chest returned not from the fracture, but from years of choosing silence, because it was easier than confrontation. The doctor watched me struggle to answer, and his expression shifted again. Not frustration. Recognition. He had seen this before. He had seen soldiers who went home and found themselves hurt in ways no uniform could protect them from. Captain Blake, he said softly, this looks like an impact injury, not a collapse, not a stumble, an impact. Something or someone struck you or forced the fall. I wanted to speak, but my ribs ached with every inhale and the words felt trapped beneath the pain. He tapped the tablet once, entering something into my chart. His voice sharpened. For your safety and for ours, I am noting potential assault. My head lifted despite the pain. The word echoed through me, heavy, undeniable. Assault. The doctor continued, his tone firm, but not unkind. This is standard when injuries do not match the explanation. You do not have to say anything now, but you will be asked. My chest tightened. I tasted the metallic edge of fear again, the way I had on the patio, the suffocating sense that the world around me was closing in. Except here in the ER, no one laughed. No one dismissed me. No one accused me of being dramatic. Here, the truth was not a disruption. It was necessary. A nurse entered with a fresh set of vitals. Her gaze flicked from the monitor to my face, reading the pain I could not hide. She whispered to the doctor. Oxygen is dropping slightly. Should I call behavioral health support if needed? He nodded. Bring them in standby. She hesitated, then touched my arm lightly. I am sorry, she said in a voice low enough that only I could hear. Whatever happened, you do not deserve this. Her words cracked something inside me more cleanly than the rib had. Because someone finally said it. Someone who had no stake in my family image. Someone who saw me as more than the quiet daughter who never caused trouble. As the doctor stepped away, I stared at the ceiling, the harsh fluorescent lights blurring into a wash of white. My chest rose and fell in shallow, painful breaths. Potential assault. It felt like a doorway I had been too afraid to open for years. And now, in the cold, bright certainty of the military hospital, that door had been forced open. There was no turning back. By the time morning light filtered through the blinds of my ER room, the hospital had already moved from treatment to protocol. In the civilian world, a cracked rib might have been written off as an accident if no one pushed hard enough for answers. But in the military world, especially for a commissioned officer, injuries that compromised duty readiness triggered mandatory reporting. There was no hiding inside silence now. A nurse entered first, checking the monitors before handing me a clipboard. Captain Blake, per regulation, we have to file an initial injury report. You will need to sign the preliminary acknowledgement. My fingers tightened around the pen, though every breath still carried a faint echo of pain. She did not pressure me, just waited with quiet patience. But the moment I signed, the machine around me came alive. Within an hour, a representative from the hospital's administration stopped by, then a liaison officer, and then, inevitably, CID, Criminal Investigation Division. It was a name every soldier knew and one no one wanted to interact with. The CID agent who arrived was a tall man with sharp features, softened only by the fatigue under his eyes. His uniform was crisp, but lived in like he had worn responsibility for a long time. He pulled up a chair beside my bed, not close enough to feel intrusive, but close enough to show he meant business. Captain Blake, he began calmly. I am Special Agent Torres. As you know, when an officer sustains an injury that may impact service readiness, we are required to determine cause. His tone was professional, but careful, as if he were stepping through a minefield. Can you walk me through what happened last night? I stared at the blanket covering my lap, fingers curling slightly at the edge. Images replayed in my mind with startling clarity. The slick patio, Ethan's push disguised as a gentle touch, the sudden drop, Linda's laughter ringing louder than the fall itself. But the years of silence in that house wrapped around me again, familiar and heavy. I swallowed. I fell, I said quietly. His pen did not move. He waited and waited. When I offered nothing else, his tone shifted. Captain Blake, this injury is not consistent with a simple fall. The ER team noticed that immediately. His gaze held steady but not unkind. I need to know if someone caused it. My pulse stuttered. The room felt smaller. My ribs ached as if reminding me of every reason I had stayed quiet for so long. It was easier, I whispered, hoping the conversation would end there. But CID agents were trained to hear what people tried not to say. Easier than what, ma'am? Before I could answer, a knock sounded on the doorframe. The attending physician stepped inside, face somber. Agent Torres, may I interrupt? He held a tablet, my CT results, my report. Everything laid out in stark black and white. She is not ready to give details, but she needs to know something. He looked at me carefully. Captain, there is a mandatory note in your chart. Due to the nature of the injury and the fact that your previous deployment trauma was aggravated, this is automatically flagged for further review. This will escalate unless you clarify. His voice sank deeper on those last words. Not a threat, a warning. Silence would not protect me this time. It would only drag the investigation deeper, make more people involved, pull my entire chain of command into something I had tried to avoid for years. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. The doctor and the CID agent exchanged a brief, weighted glance. They both knew they were hitting the same wall one I had spent decades constructing. After a moment, Torres stood. I will come back after you have had time, Captain. If this was an accident, you have nothing to fear. If it was not, he paused. Then you have nothing to be ashamed of. He left the room with quiet footsteps. The doctor stayed. He sat on the edge of the neighboring chair, shoulders sinking with the kind of exhaustion only seen in those who have witnessed too much pain ignored. Captain, I have seen this pattern before. Soldiers come home and the uniform protects them out there, but not always at home. His voice softened further. An impact like this requires force. And your CT shows fresh trauma layered over old scar tissue. This did not happen from simply slipping. His words held no doubt. Only truth. But truth was the thing that had always caused the most trouble in my family. I looked away, blinking against the sting behind my eyes. Before the doctor could say more, the door opened again. This time, it was one of the nurses. She hesitated, holding her phone awkwardly. I am sorry to interrupt, she said, but someone dropped this off for you. They said you might need it. When she handed me the phone, my stomach tightened. There on the screen was a paused video. The thumbnail alone told me everything. The neighbor's camera angle, the patio, me falling, Linda standing with her arms crossed, mouth open in laughter, Ethan smirking. My blood ran cold. The nurse whispered, "They thought you should see it before anyone else does." My thumb trembled as I pressed play. The moment played out with brutal clarity. Ethan's subtle shove, my foot sliding, my body hitting the concrete. The gasp from the crowd. And then Linda's voice rising above the shock. "Stop being dramatic. You are embarrassing us." The doctor exhaled sharply through his nose. "Agent Torres is going to need to see that," he said quietly. My heart thudded against my cracked rib, each beat sending a pulse of pain through my chest. I felt exposed, seen, and strangely lighter all at once. The truth was no longer trapped inside me. It was right there on a screen, undeniable, unfiltered, unavoidable. The doctor rested a hand on the bed railing, not touching me, but grounding the moment. "Captain Blake," he spoke slowly, "if you stay silent now, you are protecting the people who hurt you, not yourself, not your career, not your future." I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, silence did not feel like safety. It felt like surrender. And something inside me was finally ready to stop surrendering. The phone had barely settled on the bedside table when it began to buzz again. The caller ID flashed the name I least wanted to see. Linda. My pulse tightened. The doctor gave me a look that said I did not have to answer, but something in me knew I needed to hear whatever performance she had prepared. I thumbed the screen and pressed it to my ear. Her voice exploded before I could speak. Rowan. Blake? What on earth do you think you are doing? I closed my eyes. My ribs throbbed in time with her rising pitch. You do not drag this family into some military drama because you cannot watch where you are walking. Her accusation hit harder than the fall, because it was familiar, a script she had used for years. Something goes wrong. Blame Rowan. Pretend the damage came from her flaws, not their cruelty. Linda did not pause for breath. Do you have any idea how this looks? Officers calling the house, people asking questions. Your father is mortified. Mortified, not worried, not concerned, not horrified that his daughter had been hurt. Mortified that I had drawn attention to their precious backyard theater. I swallowed, trying to keep my breathing steady as pain sparked along my ribcage. I did not call anyone, I said quietly. The neighbor did. She scoffed so loud the phone crackled. Of course. Always someone else causing trouble. Never you. She shifted into the tone she used when lecturing me about how I needed to be more ladylike, more agreeable, more invisible. Rowan, you need to tell them this was an accident. That is all. A simple accident. My jaw tightened. Linda's version of an accident was a truth scrubbed clean of accountability. Her truth required me to swallow the push, swallow the humiliation, swallow the pain, and pretend the world looked the way she needed it to look. I said nothing. Silence stretched for 3 beats. Then she went colder. You fell because you are clumsy, not because Ethan touched you. My lungs constricted not just from the injury, but from something deeper. The years of hearing her rewrite reality until even I doubted my own experiences. The years of hearing her turn Ethan into a flawless son and me into the shadow that ruined every family photo. I wanted to speak. I wanted to correct her, but Linda's voice rose again sharp and venomous. You will not ruin my son's life over your lack of balance. My lack of balance. I felt a sting behind my eyes, not from tears, but from the realization that she truly believed it. There was not a molecule of doubt in her voice. She needed me to be the problem so she would not have to question the boy she had worshipped since the day she moved in. Rowan, listen to me very carefully. She continued, her tone turning icy. You are going to fix this. You are going to tell whoever is investigating that nothing happened, that you slipped. You are not dragging our family through some official mess because you want attention. Attention. That word struck like another shove. As if everything I had suffered, deployment, trauma, rotor strike, broken ribs, years of quiet endurance, had been some elaborate performance to steal the spotlight she kept shining on Ethan. My hand trembled around the phone. Linda continued each sentence harder than the last. You have always been dramatic. You always make things bigger than they are. And now, look at what you have started. Her voice dropped into something even darker. I will not let you take my family down with you. Something inside me cracked, then, not a rib, not a physical bone, but something older. Something that had stretched and stretched under years of pressure and finally reached its breaking point. For most of my life, I had believed keeping the peace meant staying quiet. But now, listening to her dismiss my pain while I lay in a hospital bed hooked up to monitors, I understood something painful and true. Peace built on silence is not peace. It is control. Linda kept talking, but her words blurred into background noise as the realization settled. She did not want me safe. She wanted me compliant. Rowan, are you even listening? You will fix this. Do you understand me? My voice came out low, steady, surprising even myself. No. Silence slammed through the line. Then Linda hissed the word like I had committed a crime. What did you just say? I inhaled slowly, ignoring the flare of pain in my ribs. I said no. I will not lie for Ethan. A sharp intake of breath shot through the phone. For a moment, she could not speak. Linda Blake, queen of cutting remarks, was speechless. Then her voice returned small, tight, filled with disbelief that her decades-long control had slipped. Rowan, think about what you are doing. You are choosing strangers over your family. The irony almost made me laugh. Strangers had shown more concern for me last night than she had in 14 years. The nurse, the doctor, the neighbor who called 911. Family was not defined by DNA or marriage documents. It was defined by care, by truth, by people who did not laugh when you were hurting. Her breathing grew louder, more frantic. If you do this, Rowan, if you push this further, there will be consequences. I felt the weight of that threat. I felt the years of training in silence tugging at me. But then I felt the ache in my ribs, the memory of Ethan's shove, the sting of the fall, the humiliation, and Linda's laughter echoing in the background. For the first time in my life, the fear did not win. I am done protecting people who would not protect me, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut like glass. Linda's tone cracked. Rowan, do not do this. You will regret it. The line went dead. I stared at the silent phone in my hand. The room felt colder, but my chest felt lighter. And somewhere beneath the pain and the fear, something small but fierce flickered awake. The beginning of a truth I could no longer ignore. Linda was not just toxic. She was dangerous in ways that were becoming impossible to excuse. And now that I had finally said no, I knew everything was about to change. I had barely hung up on Linda when another knock came at the door. It was softer than the others had been, almost hesitant, but firm enough to signal someone who belonged in military spaces and knew how to move in them. A deep voice followed. Captain Blake, mind, if I come in, I looked up, expecting another nurse or another CID follow-up. Instead, a broad-shouldered man stepped through the doorway wearing duty fatigues that had seen real work, not desk hours. His hair was cut short, but graying at the edges, his expression steady. Weathered, familiar in a way that tugged at a memory I had not touched in years. It took me a moment before recognition clicked into place. Sergeant First Class Nolan Cruz, my father's old friend. He had served with Dad back when I was still a kid who thought the Army was just uniforms and medals. I had not seen him since high school when he used to drop by the house for poker nights and barbecue weekends long before Linda turned those nights into pageants for Ethan. Seeing him here felt like the past walking directly into my present, refusing to let me hide behind injury or silence. He removed his patrol cap and tucked it under his arm. Heard you were here, he said, voice low and threaded with concern. I thought I should check in. Your dad would have come himself, but with his health. He let the sentence fade. Guilt pinched behind my ribs, mingling with the physical ache. Dad had been fading slowly for years. And I had left him alone with Linda, alone in that house, too hollowed out by grief and exhaustion to defend himself or me. Sergeant Cruz stepped closer, eyes sweeping over the monitors, the band around my arm, the tightness in my breathing. This doesn't look like a simple fall, Rowan. His tone was direct, not accusing, not pressing, just honest, something I was not used to inside my family. He pulled the chair beside the bed and sat down with the quiet heaviness of someone who had seen enough pain to recognize it without needing an explanation. What happened? His question was gentle, but it hit like a hammer. I opened my mouth, but for a moment no sound came out. Years of practiced silence clogged my throat. Every instinct I had developed since childhood told me to deflect, to downplay, to protect everyone but myself. I inhaled slowly. Pain shot across my ribcage. He noticed. Take your time, he said. I shook my head. It is not the pain, I whispered. It is everything else. He nodded with a kind of understanding that made my eyes sting unexpectedly. I remembered this man sitting at our dinner table years ago telling young soldiers that courage was not just charging into fire, but also speaking truth when silence felt safer. I had forgotten that part. Or maybe I had never truly understood it until now. I told him the bare outlines first. The BBQ, Ethan mocking me, Linda laughing, the shove, the fall, the breath that would not come back. His jaw tightened slightly at the mention of Ethan, but he stayed quiet, not interrupting. not feeding me anger, just listening. And that alone loosened something inside me. So I kept talking. I told him how Linda had treated me for years, how Ethan's cruelty grew unchecked, how my father, worn down by time and grief, had retreated into quiet compliance, and how I had convinced myself that silence was the only way to hold what was left of us together. When I finished, there was a long moment of stillness. Cruz leaned back in the chair and let out a slow exhale, the kind that carried both frustration and sorrow. "Rowan," he said quietly, "your father always spoke highly of you. He was proud, even when he did not say it out loud." The words struck deeper than I expected, but they did not soften the truth. Cruz continued, his voice firming. "I know Linda. I know the way she shifts blame. And Ethan," he shook his head once, "that boy always liked getting away with more than he should have." I waited, bracing for the usual lecture. Be patient, be understanding, keep the peace. But Cruz was not like the others. Instead, he leaned forward, eyes locking on mine with a clarity that made my pulse hold still. "Silence does not protect you, Rowan. It protects the people who hurt you." His words landed like a strike, sharp and undeniable. He was not wrong. And hearing it from someone who had known my father long before Linda entered our world made it hit even harder. I swallowed, my voice cracked. "I have spent so long trying not to make things worse." Cruz lifted an eyebrow. "Worse for who, you or them?" The question carved through every layer of conditioning Linda had built around me. I looked away, blinking fast, the hospital lights swimming at the edges of my vision. He softened slightly. "Rowan, pain you hide only grows teeth. Hurt you do not name only digs deeper, and people like Linda thrive when the people they target stay quiet." I felt the truth of that like a bruise under my skin. He sat back. "I am not here to tell you what to do, but I am telling you this. If you stay silent now, Ethan walks away clean. Linda keeps control, and you keep paying the cost." My breath trembled not from the cracked rib, but from the weight of recognition. "You deserve better than that. You always did." I had spent years believing that standing up for myself was selfish, that confronting the truth would break the family. But maybe the family had been broken long before I ever tried to hold it together. Cruz stood, placing his patrol cap under his arm again. "If you need support when CID comes back, I will be here. Just say the word." I nodded, unable to trust my voice. As he left the room, the truth he had spoken lingered long after the door swung shut. Silence protects abusers, not you. And for the first time in years, I was beginning to understand that he was right. I was drifting in and out of shallow sleep when the soft vibration of a message pulled me back to consciousness. The pain medication dulled the sharpest edge of the cracked rib, but every breath still carried a pressure that reminded me nothing about this situation was small. I blinked at the screen, expecting another message from CID, or perhaps one more venom-laced attempt from Linda. Instead, the notification preview showed a number I did not recognize. No name, just a local Killeen area code. A second later, a text followed. "You should have this." No explanation, no greeting. Just a video file attached. My chest tightened before I even opened it. Because I knew. Deep down in the places denial tried to bury, I knew what it was. The neighbor's security camera, the one positioned with a perfect angle on the patio. My finger hovered over the play icon. For a moment, I could hear Linda's voice in my head, sharp and insistent. "It was an accident. You're clumsy. You slipped." But another voice, older, steadier, painfully overdue, rose beneath it. "The truth is the truth, whether you want it or not." I pressed play. The video filled the screen. At first, it showed a calm, ordinary backyard scene. String lights, folding chairs, people milling around with paper plates. Nothing violent, nothing dramatic. But then the camera followed the moment everything cracked open. There I was, crossing toward the table for food. And there was Ethan stepping directly into my path with that familiar swagger that always made him look bigger than he actually was. He leaned in, said something the camera had no microphone to capture. I watched the version of myself on screen, tense subtly, then try to walk around him. And then it happened. That push, that accidental shoulder bump. It was small, but the intention behind it was unmistakable. Ethan angled his body just enough to knock me off balance. My foot slid across the wet tile. My other foot struck the beer can, and I fell. Hard. Violently. My whole body recoiled, watching it happen from the outside. The sound of impact was faint behind the grainy video, but my ribs remembered it vividly. I felt them ache as if reenacting the moment. But the fall wasn't the part that broke something inside me. It was what came after. Ethan laughed. Not nervous laughter. Not shocked laughter. Mocking. Pleased. Then the camera shifted slightly as the neighbor adjusted something in their yard, and suddenly Linda came into view. Arms crossed. Smug expression sharp as glass. And then her voice came through clear, as if she were standing right beside me. "Get up! You're embarrassing us!" She said it while I was on the ground, clutching my ribs, struggling for breath, my body curled in pain. She said it loud enough for everyone to hear. Loud enough for everyone to remember later, but pretend they didn't. My throat tightened. The betrayal hit like another blow. Watching it was worse than living it. In real time, my brain had been fogged with pain, confusion, and shock. But here from the outside, it was all so nakedly cruel. So deliberate. So heartless. I watched Linda's expression frame by frame. There was no concern, no instinct to step forward, no fear that something serious had happened. There was only irritation that I had disrupted the clean picture she wanted of her perfect evening. Only embarrassment that the daughter she never wanted to claim had dared to bleed in front of her audience. My grip on the phone trembled. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. A shiver ran through me, cold and sharp. My breath came faster, uneven, almost hitching as I fought to keep control. The betrayal was physical, not abstract, not emotional alone. A full body shock. Like reliving a deployment injury, but layered with something deeper, more personal. I rewound the video and watched again, and again. Each time the fall hurt less than the laughter. Each time the impact felt secondary to the cruelty that followed. The nurse walking by paused when she saw my expression. She stepped closer. "Are you okay, Captain?" The question gently asked nearly undid me. I swallowed, forcing words through a tightening throat. "Can you stay a moment?" She nodded immediately and closed the privacy curtain behind her. I played the video again, unable to look away. When the clip ended, she exhaled quietly, her hand coming up to cover her mouth in disbelief. "Captain Blake." She shook her head slowly. "I am so sorry." My vision blurred. Not from tears, those still refused to fall, but from the weight of everything I had pretended was tolerable for too many years. "This is what happened," I whispered, finally speaking the sentence I had been too afraid to say aloud. "This is exactly what happened." The nurse nodded. "And now it is documented." The words felt heavier than anything CID could write in their report. Because she was right. This wasn't hearsay, or memory, or interpretation. It was proof. Proof I had never allowed myself to believe existed. My chest constricted again, but not entirely from injury. There was a part of me that had always assumed I exaggerated my pain, that maybe Linda was right. Maybe I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too weak. The video burned those lies to ash. I was not clumsy. I was pushed. I was not dramatic. I was hurt. I was not embarrassing them. They were embarrassing themselves. The nurse placed a hand on the bed railing, grounding the moment. "Captain Blake, you need to show this to the investigators. You need to protect yourself." My fingers tightened around the phone knuckles, pale. Something inside me cracked open a deep seam I had kept sealed since childhood. It wasn't just the fall, or the pain. It was the decades of small cruelties leading to this one monstrous moment. The years of staying silent so others could stay comfortable. The lifetime of being treated like an outsider in my own home. And somehow it all condensed into the sound of Linda's voice echoing through that clip. "Get up, you're embarrassing us." I flinched when the words replayed in my mind. I felt them in my ribs, in my spine, in every bruise, invisible and visible. Emotional betrayal peak. It was not a literary term now. It was a lived moment. My body shook once, a tiny, involuntary tremor, like my system was releasing something toxic it had held far too long. I closed my eyes to steady myself. When I opened them, something had shifted. The pain was still there. The fear was still there. But for the first time in years, I felt something stronger than both. Clarity. And a rising, undeniable need for truth. The nurse touched my arm lightly. "You are not alone in this," I breathed out slowly. "No," I whispered. Not anymore, because now the truth had a voice, and I finally had evidence strong enough to break the silence I had carried for far too long. The video kept replaying in my mind long after the screen went dark, each frame looping with the clean cruelty of a blade sliding in and out of the same wound. Ethan's shove, my foot slipping, my body hitting concrete, and Linda's voice sharp and cold. "Get up! You're embarrassing us." Every time the words echoed, something deep in my chest clenched, then released like an old knot coming undone one strand at a time. For years, I had trained my breathing under pressure. In a cockpit, panic kills. In a crisis, breath is a weapon. On missions, the first thing my instructors drilled into me was control your air and you control the moment. But lying in that hospital bed, the exact opposite had happened. My breath had controlled me tight, reactive, shallow. Now, for the first time since the fall, I placed a hand carefully against my ribs and inhaled slow, deliberate, steady. Pain flared, but this time I did not shy away from it. I leaned into it. Not because it felt good, but because it reminded me I was still here, still capable, still more than the weak, dramatic girl Linda had tried to sculpt me into. The nurse brought water, adjusted the bed angle, and dimmed the lights. When she left, silence settled around me, not the oppressive silence of my childhood home, but a quiet that allowed me to think clearly. I replayed Cruz's words. "Silence does not protect you. It protects the people who hurt you." And the doctor's warning, "This will escalate unless you clarify." And then the video, undeniable proof that I had not imagined the cruelty, that I had not exaggerated the pain, that I had not misunderstood the humiliation I felt when 30 people watched and did nothing. For so long I had believed my silence kept the peace. But peace that depended on my suffering was not peace. It was imprisonment. My ribs throbbed again, a deep pulse under my palm. I breathed through it, slow, controlled, intentional. With each inhale, I felt the fear loosen its grip. With each exhale, a new clarity formed. I opened the video again, not because I needed to see it, but because I needed to confront it head on. This time, I watched it differently. Not as the powerless daughter who had curled on the ground while her stepfamily smirked, but as Captain Rowan Blake, Army aviation officer survivor of deployment trauma, and someone who had flown men through storms that would have broken Ethan in seconds. I was not weak. I was not clumsy. I was not dramatic. I was hurt. And they had laughed. That truth no longer shattered me. It fueled me. The pain became a signal, a reminder that I deserved better. A reminder that silence had served its purpose long enough, and now it was time to stand. The decision settled in me with a weight that felt both terrifying and strangely freeing. I picked up the phone with hands steadier than they had been since last night. I opened the text thread with the unknown number. Then I pressed the share button and selected the contact for Special Agent Torres. Before fear could rise, I hit send. The message delivered instantly, the small blue bubble glowing like a flare in the dark. Within seconds, 3 dots appeared as he typed back. "Got it. I'm reviewing it now. Please stay where you are, Captain. I will return soon." My heart pounded, not in panic now, but in anticipation. The truth was no longer trapped inside me. It was moving, working, spreading beyond the control of Linda's lies. I set the phone aside and closed my eyes again. Breath in, breath out. Slow, steady. I felt every inch of bruised bone, but none of it intimidated me anymore. Pain was just information, and now I knew what to do with it. When the nurse returned, I asked, "Can you help me sit up?" She hesitated. "Are you sure that will hurt?" I nodded once. "It already hurts. Might as well do something with it." She adjusted the bed, helping me shift slowly, carefully, until I was sitting upright, back supported by pillows. The pressure in my ribs flared, but the sense of control returned with it. Sitting felt like reclaiming territory I had surrendered. When she left again, I used one hand to reach for the small cabinet beside the bed. My military ID lay inside next to my keys. I stared at the ID for a long moment. The photo showed me in uniform, calm, confident, direct. A woman who did not bow to chaos. A woman who had flown evac missions with lives hanging from her voice commands. A woman who had held her own in situations far deadlier than a Texas barbecue. Somewhere along the way, I had allowed my family to convince me that version of me did not exist at home, that my strength stopped at the doorstep. No more. I set the ID on the blanket, letting the reality of who I was sink in. A few hours later, the doctor returned with updated instructions. "Rest for now, Captain, but when you're ready, you'll need follow-up imaging." I nodded, but what I said next took even him by surprise. "I need to report back to Fort Cavazos tomorrow." His brows lifted. "Are you fit for duty?" Numb. Not physically, but emotionally, mentally. This time, I wasn't running. I clarified, "I'm not returning to flight status. I'm going to check in with my chain of command." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Understood." Before he left, he added quietly, "For what it's worth, you're doing the right thing." When the room was quiet again, I picked up my phone and opened the base's scheduling portal. With slow, deliberate motions, I submitted a request for an in-person check-in with my commanding officer. Reason for appointment: injury report and personal statement. I stared at the words for a full minute before pressing submit. As soon as I did, the confirmation pinged through. Report time: 0900 hours. Fort Cavazos. Tomorrow morning. My ribs ached fiercely, but underneath that pain was something electric, something steady, something strong enough to stand on. I whispered to myself, not as a plea, but as a promise. No more silence. Not for them. Not ever again. I returned to the house at sunset, the sky streaked in fading orange that made every shadow in the yard look sharper than it should. My ribs throbbed with each step, but the pain no longer guided me. It only reminded me why I was here. I needed my things, my documents, my uniform, everything I had left behind when I still believed silence was safer than confrontation. The driveway was empty except for Ethan's truck, its chrome grille catching the dying light like bared teeth. I ignored the twist in my stomach and climbed the steps. I had a key, but I never got to use it. The moment I pushed open the screen door, Ethan stepped into the frame, blocking the entrance with an exaggerated stretch of his shoulders. "Well, look who crawled back." His voice carried the same smugness from the BBQ, except now it was tainted with something brittle underneath the early scent of fear. I kept my tone level. "I just came to get my things. Move." Ethan scoffed and leaned one arm against the doorframe. "You caused a lot of problems today, Captain." I clenched my jaw at the mockery layered into the word. Problems. As if bruised ribs, hospital visits, and CID inquiries were inconveniences I had created for sport. I stepped forward. Ethan didn't budge. Instead, he pushed his chest out and said with a self-righteous shake of his head, "You fell. You tripped. That's on you. Not me." Before I could answer, Linda appeared behind him like a shadow slipping into place. She wore her usual mask of polished indignation. "Rowan," she snapped, "what exactly do you think you're doing showing up like this after the stunt you pulled?" I stared at her, too tired to pretend anymore. "Getting my things. And then I'm done." She barked a laugh. "Done. You don't get to say when things are done. You brought military people into this family. You embarrassed us." My ribs tightened. Embarrassed us. The same words she had used while I was struggling to breathe on the patio. This time, I didn't let them sink in. Instead, I met her eyes. "I didn't embarrass you. You did that yourselves." Linda's expression twisted. Her shoulders stiffened and something in her posture shifted from defensive to aggressive. "Don't you dare blame us for your clumsiness," she hissed. "You're the one who made a scene." Ethan chimed in quickly, his voice louder as if volume could rewrite the video. "It was an accident, Rowan. You slipped. You're making it bigger than it was." A flicker of red ignited in my chest, rising like heat under the bruises. I opened my mouth, but Linda moved first. She shoved Ethan aside, stepped forward, and before I could brace myself, she slammed her hand directly onto the left side of my chest, right over the cracked rib. Pain exploded. A bright, blinding, white-hot burst. My knees buckled. My breath vanished. I dropped to the porch railing and grabbed it with my right hand as the world swayed violently. Linda's voice hit me through the haze. "Stop exaggerating, Rowan! You're trying to make us look bad." My vision blurred around the edges. For a moment, all I saw were colors and shadows, and the outline of Ethan's stupid, wide-eyed shock as he realized Linda had gone too far. I tried to breathe, but my chest refused. My fingers clawed at the railing. I forced air in through clenched teeth. Every inhale scraped like broken glass. A door slammed across the street. A neighbor stepped onto their porch, eyes widening as they took in the scene. "Are you okay?" they shouted. Their voice sliced into the moment like a warning siren. Ethan jerked his head toward them, suddenly frantic. "It was an accident. She slipped again. She's always slipping." The neighbor didn't buy a word of it. They pulled out their phone and dialed. I heard the faint words, even through the ringing in my ears. "I'm calling 911. There's an injured woman here." Linda spun toward them, shrill and desperate. "She's fine. Don't you dare!" But the neighbor kept talking, pacing closer. "She is not fine. She can barely breathe." Someone else's porch light snapped on. Another neighbor stepped outside. Within moments, it felt like the entire block was watching, the same way the backyard had watched me fall. Except this time, they weren't laughing. Ethan grew louder, voice cracking with panic. "It was an accident," she tripped. "Tell them, Rowan! Tell them it was nothing! Tell them!" His words whipped through the air, frantic and messy. I pushed myself upright, inch by inch, gripping the porch rail with both hands, ribs screaming in protest. When I finally stood, the world steadied enough for me to speak. Ethan stared at me, eyes wide, desperate for the lie that had always protected him. The lie I used to give. Not anymore. My voice was low but clear, even through the pain. "Your accident broke more than my ribs. It broke the last piece of silence I had left." The block fell silent. Ethan's mouth hung open, useless. Linda's face drained of color. The neighbor on the phone whispered something urgently into the receiver. Sirens began echoing in the distance, faint but unmistakable. The moment stretched taut and electric, the kind of moment that rewrites a life. I felt my ribs rise and fall with a shaky breath. It hurt, but this time the pain didn't weaken me. It steadied me, because now it belonged to truth, not silence, not them, and not anymore. The following weekend, the neighborhood held another barbecue, a smaller one, but still noisy enough that you could hear the country music 3 houses away. I was not invited, of course, but I knew this crowd. The same people who watched me fall, the same people who whispered afterward. I arrived because CID told me to. They wanted a neutral location where everyone involved could be present. I parked a few houses down to avoid making an entrance and walked toward the backyard gate. My ribs still ached, wrapped tightly beneath my shirt, but the pain no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a reminder of truth. As I stepped through the open gate, the chatter dimmed. People turned. Some nodded cautiously. A few whispered. They all remembered last week and the ambulance lights. At the center of the yard, Ethan stood at the grill, performing for a small group like nothing had happened. He held a spatula in one hand and a beer in the other, laughing too loud and too often. Linda hovered behind him, smoothing her hair, adjusting her blouse, positioning herself like a politician awaiting cameras. When she saw me, her face tightened. "What are you doing here, Rowan? This is a family event." I did not answer because I did not have to. 2 men in plain CID attire entered the yard right behind me, followed by 2 military police officers in uniform. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. One neighbor dropped a paper plate. The air shifted with the unmistakable weight of authority. Ethan stiffened when he saw the badges. His hand tightened around the spatula until his knuckles whitened. Linda stepped in front of him as if her body could shield him. "Officers, this is unnecessary," she said with a laugh that wobbled on the edges. "Everything was a misunderstanding." She fell. "That is all." One of the CID agents, a tall black man with a calm, steady voice, looked directly at her. "Ma'am, we have evidence to review with the parties involved." He lifted his phone. The backyard became so quiet, the only sound was the soft hum of the grill. Linda swallowed. Evidence of what exactly? The agent did not answer. Instead, he turned toward the group gathered behind Ethan. "For transparency, we will play a segment of the recording obtained from a residential security camera." Ethan's face blanched instantly. Linda's hand flew up to her chest. "Wait, hold on. You cannot just show people things out of context." But he already pressed play. The screen glowed in the Texas sun, and everyone leaned in instinctively. There it was, me walking past Ethan, him stepping sideways just enough to bump my shoulder, my foot catching the beer can, my body hitting the concrete, then the sound that froze the entire yard. Linda's voice, clear, sharp, unmistakable. "Get up! You are embarrassing us!" I watched a slow, quiet horror move through the crowd like a wave. It passed over each face in delayed ripples as they processed what they heard, what they saw. The agent let the video play 5 more seconds, then paused it. The yard was silent except for the sizzle of meat on the grill. A neighbor near the patio whispered under their breath, "My God!" Another neighbor shook her head, arms crossed tight. She was hurt. She could not get up. "How could you laugh?" Ethan tried to speak, but the words caught. He looked around, desperate for an ally. Someone. Anyone. Nobody moved. His bravado cracked open. "That is not what it looks like." The video glitched. "That is not real." Linda jumped in louder. She was fine. She was being dramatic. Rowan always exaggerates. She said it with such confidence you could almost believe she was used to people accepting her version as truth. But the video still hung glowing in the air. The CID agent raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, the recording is time-stamped and authenticated. It matches the injuries documented at Carl R. Darnall." The color drained from her face. People around her stepped back slightly as if her denial carried a physical weight. Someone from across the yard spoke up. One of the older uncles who had been at every family event since I was a kid. His voice was deeper, heavier than I had ever heard it. "Linda, you laughed at her." When she could not breathe. The accusation hit harder than the fall ever did. Linda's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Every lie she tried to grasp at slipped right through her fingers under the pressure of witnesses. Phones rose in the crowd. People recorded. The humiliation that had once been mine now spun toward her like a spotlight turning with precision. Ethan stepped forward, his hands shaking. "This is getting blown out of proportion." She fell. I did not hurt her. The CID agent finally addressed him. "Mr. Blake, you made physical contact which initiated the fall. That is documented. You then failed to provide aid and engaged in verbal harassment while the injured party struggled to stand. This will be included in the investigation." Military police stepped closer, but not touching him, staying in that deliberate space that warned of what could come next. A neighbor turned to me, her eyes soft with something between regret and respect. "Rowan, did it hurt that bad?" I met her gaze and answered truthfully. "Yes," Linda snapped. "She is doing this for attention, for sympathy. She wants to make us look like monsters." An older woman who had babysat half the street cut her off sharply. "No, dear. You did that to yourself. You laughed. I saw you." The MP officer nodded toward the CID agent, signaling they had all they needed. The agent addressed the yard. "Thank you for your cooperation. We will continue the investigation at a later time." He turned to me. "Captain Blake, we will debrief at Fort Cavazos tomorrow." I gave a short nod. Ethan looked between all of us, his world shrinking by the second. His voice broke. "Rowan, say something. Tell them it was not that bad. Tell them." For the first time in years, I felt no guilt for the silence I gave him. Some truths do not need shouting. They just need to stop being hidden. The MP officer spoke quietly into his radio, and the tension in the yard settled into place like a verdict. The public exposure was complete. The last pieces of the lie had shattered, and everyone saw exactly who broke them. The fallout did not explode like a bomb. It spread slowly like smoke seeping under a closed door, filling every corner of Ethan and Linda's world before they even realized they were choking on it. 2 days after the neighborhood barbecue, when the video was shown in front of everyone, CID called me back to Fort Cavazos for the formal statement. I sat in a small interview room with neutral walls and a stainless steel table, listening to the calm, measured questions. They replayed the footage frame by frame, documenting each detail. Ethan's contact with my shoulder, the angle of my fall, Linda's ridicule, my delayed response due to pain. Everything was logged, everything was clear. When I left the building, the investigator gave me a final note. Captain Blake, this may fall under a Class A misdemeanor for Mr. Blake. It is civilian law, but because of your status, the report will be shared with local authorities. I nodded. It was not triumph. It was simply truth being allowed to stand without being shoved back into the shadows. The next morning, the consequences began. Ethan's phone buzzed non-stop. He had tried to keep it quiet, but news spreads fast in Texas neighborhoods, and even faster in gyms where reputations are currency. Ethan was a trainer at a fitness center in Killeen, known for discipline and professionalism. Clients started canceling sessions. Then the manager called him into the office. The conversation did not stay private for long. A neighbor who worked at the gym sent me a message later saying she had overheard the manager say liability issues and public behavior concerns. By noon, Ethan was placed on unpaid leave. The official term was pending investigation. The unofficial truth was that nobody wanted a trainer trending on neighborhood forums for pushing a decorated Army officer down concrete steps and laughing about it. Linda's consequences came even quicker. She had built her image like a fortress. She worked as the office manager at a dental clinic, a job she flaunted as proof of her importance in the community. The clinic had seen the video too. Patients recognized her. Some called the front desk asking if the woman mocking her stepdaughter was truly employed there. The owner of the clinic called her in for a meeting. By lunchtime, Linda was informed that she was being placed on suspension for public misconduct pending review. She stormed out of the building, slamming the door so hard a picture frame fell off the wall. She called my father immediately, screaming about how I ruined her life. My father said nothing. Later, he called me voice low and tired, saying, "Rowan, I saw the video." "I am sorry." It was the first time in years he had sounded like the man who raised me before grief and remarriage hardened him. Meanwhile, in the neighborhood, the reactions branched in every direction. Families who used to sit with Linda and Ethan during community events no longer waved when they drove by. People stepped aside at the grocery store, not in cruelty but in discomfort, because once the truth is visible, it changes the shape of how people stand next to it. A woman who had always defended Linda in petty arguments looked away when she passed her mailbox. A teenager riding his bike called out to me, "You did not deserve what they did, ma'am." Folks talk. And they were talking. Not in whispers, not behind backs, just honest recognition of cruelty that had finally been dragged into the sunlight. For the first time in my life, I was not the one shrinking in shame. The shame had gone to its rightful owners. Ethan tried to salvage his image. He knocked on doors claiming the video was taken out of context. He said I slipped. He said he had been trying to help, but everyone had seen the footage. Everyone heard Linda's voice. There was no context needed. His desperation became obvious. He stopped jogging his usual route because neighbors watched him with narrowed eyes. He avoided the grocery store because people whispered behind cereal boxes. Reputation is not lost in a moment, but it can crumble when the truth is undeniable. Linda did not leave the house for days. She peeked through blinds like the world was hunting her. But the world was not hunting her. It was simply remembering what she had done. I stayed quiet through all of it. I did not comment on social media. I did not tell my side loudly. I did not show up anywhere to prove anything. I went to work at the base. I followed my medical recovery plan. I attended my counseling appointments. I breathed, slowly, patiently, without permission from anyone. Justice does not always roar. Sometimes it moves with quiet precision, leaving nothing overturned except the lies that once held you in place. One afternoon, a neighbor approached me as I was getting out of my car. He folded his arms awkwardly and said, "Ma'am, I was raised to mind my own business, but I want you to know something. People here respect you, a lot more now than before. What happened to you was wrong, and your stepping up made others rethink how they treat their own." That meant more than I expected, not because I wanted praise, but because silence had been my prison for so long that hearing people speak truth aloud felt like a window opening. A week later, the formal notice arrived. Ethan was officially under investigation for assault with bodily injury. The county case number was attached. His court date was pending. Linda's suspension became a formal disciplinary action. Her job status changed to under review. Their social circles shrank to nothing. The Blake household, which once felt like an empire of judgment, now sat isolated behind drawn curtains. And me, I did not feel vengeful. I did not feel vindictive. I felt steady, clear. The justice arc was not about their ruin. It was about ending the version of me who believed silence was safer than truth. Some nights I sat outside on my porch, feeling the warm Texas wind move across my skin, and I thought about how easily the world could have stayed the same had the camera not caught the moment. Had I stayed quiet? Had I swallowed my pain again? But I did not. I broke the pattern, and the consequences followed exactly where they belonged. Linda and Ethan were left with the weight of their own actions. I walked forward lighter than I had in years. 2 weeks passed with the kind of uneasy quiet that sits on top of a storm. Ethan's hearing date had been set for mid-September, and by then the entire neighborhood knew. The gym had officially terminated his contract, citing liability concerns. Linda's disciplinary hearing at the dental clinic was underway. Their world was collapsing in layers, and like most people who had never faced consequences before, they started looking for someone to blame. And someone to rescue them. I should have known the day would come when one of them would show up at my door, but when the knock finally echoed through my living room on a warm Sunday afternoon, it still sent a sharp chill down my back. I opened the door slowly. Linda stood there. Her hair was unstyled, her makeup smudged. She looked smaller, like someone deflated her from the inside. Behind her, the Texas sun glared, and the wind carried the faint smell of cut grass and barbecue from a house down the street. She clasped her purse with both hands, as if holding it would keep her upright. "Rowan, we need to talk." Those 4 words were shaking at the edges. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, making it clear this was not a conversation that would take place inside my home. She swallowed hard. "It is about Ethan. He is not doing well. The lawyers said he might get real charges. They said jail is possible." She paused, trying to gather whatever dignity she thought remained. "We need your help. You can tell them it was an accident. You can tell them he did not mean to hurt you." The desperation slipped between her words like water leaking from a cracked glass. I kept my voice steady. "That is not what happened." She waved her hands frantically. "People trip, Rowan. People lose balance all the time. You of all people should know that." The moment she said that, something inside my chest tightened with cold clarity. She was not here for the truth. She was here for the illusion that had protected her for years. "Rowan," she continued, her voice trembling, "Ethan is your family. He is my son. He is all I have. Please do not ruin his life. Do not let this go too far." I stared at her. She had mocked my pain. She had watched me struggle to breathe. She had laughed. And now she wanted me to clean up the consequences of her cruelty like I had done my entire childhood. She reached out, grabbing my arm lightly. "Rowan, please. You can fix this. Just tell the court he did not push you. Tell them he was trying to help." My jaw tightened. "You want me to lie?" She stiffened. "It is not lying. It is protecting your family." It was almost stunning how easily the word family came out of her mouth, as if it had ever included me, as if all those years of dismissing me had vanished, as if the video did not exist. I pulled my arm gently out of her grip. She blinked as if the separation physically hurt her. "Rowan, he is losing everything. They let him go at the gym. The bills are piling up. He barely sleeps. He says he wants to fix things with you. I looked her dead in the eyes. He wants to fix his image, not what he did. She shook her head, tears gathering in her eyes. Why are you being so cold? Why are you doing this to us? The words struck me with a strange, hollow weight. She truly believed she was the victim of this story, that I was punishing her, that consequences were cruelty. I kept my voice calm. You want me to stand in court and pretend your son did not shove me. Pretend you did not laugh. Pretend the whole neighborhood did not watch it. She flinched at the word laugh as if hearing it aloud scratched something raw. Rowan, please. People can forgive mistakes. Help him. Help us. Her voice cracked with the desperation of someone whose walls had finally caved in. She was crying now, wiping tears with shaking fingers. My silence stretched between us until I felt her hope twitch and fade. I stepped back, putting physical distance between us because emotional distance had never been allowed when I was a child. I spoke slowly, letting the truth settle like dust. You laughed when I could not breathe. Why should I save you now? The tears stopped instantly, not because the crying ended, but because she froze. The truth had landed. She looked at me like I had struck her, but my words were not meant to hurt. They were meant to place responsibility exactly where it belonged. I am sorry, she whispered. Not with sincerity, but with fear. Fear of losing. Fear of judgment. Fear of a world finally seeing her without the mask she had polished for decades. I answered with honesty. No, you are sorry you got caught. She looked away, her breath shuddering through her chest. Rowan, please. Ethan is my son. If he goes to jail, I do not know what will happen to him. I do not know what will happen to me. And there it was, the truth. She was not seeking justice. She was seeking protection from the repercussions of her own cruelty. I took a deep breath, anchoring myself in everything that brought me here. The fall, the ER, the video, the humiliation, the years of being dismissed in my own home. I will tell the truth in court. That is all. She stared at me, mouth open, stunned. Truth! That single word seemed to confuse her like it was a language she had never learned. She reached out again, but stopped when she saw my expression. The silence between us felt like standing on opposite sides of a canyon. She understood then that nothing she said would pull me back across. Finally, she whispered, "You are choosing them over us," meaning the military, the people who saw me, the people who treated me with respect. My voice softened, not out of pity, but clarity. I am choosing myself. She trembled, her eyes welling with another wave of tears, but she did not step closer this time. She knew something had shifted permanently, something she could not undo. Without another word, she turned and walked down the driveway, her shoulders shaking. She had come expecting to win me back with guilt like she always had. She left, realizing the person she used to control did not exist anymore. I watched her go, not with anger and not with satisfaction. Just peace. Quiet peace. Revenge does not always look like shouting or slamming doors. Sometimes revenge is simply refusing to carry someone else's consequences anymore. Sometimes revenge is the stillness of choosing truth over silence. And that is exactly what I did. The courthouse in Bell County always smelled faintly of old carpet and stronger coffee. It was the kind of place where lives shifted in small rooms, and fluorescent lights hummed above every decision. I arrived early on the morning of Ethan's hearing, wearing my uniform pressed clean and sharp, not because I wanted to intimidate anyone, but because uniform meant truth for me. It meant accountability. It meant standing in who I was without apology. When I stepped through the metal detector, the officer at the front desk nodded respectfully. "Good morning, Captain Blake." He said it so naturally I almost forgot there were still places where my name carried weight that was earned, not inherited. The courtroom was half full. Neighbors filled the benches. A few gym clients whispered among themselves. Even two women from Linda's dental clinic sat near the back watching like they were witnessing a storm roll in. Ethan sat at the defendant's table wearing a suit that did not quite fit. He kept tugging at the sleeves, his shoulders hunched as if trying to fold into himself. Linda sat behind him, clutching her purse with both hands. She looked different from the proud, polished woman she had always been. Her face was pale, her lips pressed in a straight line. She looked like somebody waiting for a verdict on her own life. The judge entered and everyone stood. The hearing began without drama. No shouting, no theatrics, just order, structure, evidence. When they called my name to testify, I stood and walked to the witness stand, feeling the weight of the room shift toward me. I raised my right hand, swearing to tell the truth. I sat down and kept my back straight, ignoring the dull ache in my ribs that had become a familiar companion. The attorney asked simple questions at first. My name, my rank, my service, my medical records. Then they played the video again, this time on a large screen facing the entire courtroom. The moment played exactly as it had in the backyard. Ethan stepping sideways, my shoulder shifting, my foot catching the crushed can, my body hitting the concrete. And then the voice, Linda's voice, clear, sharp, cold. Get up, you are embarrassing us. A whisper rippled through the courtroom like a collective exhale. Even those who had seen the video before flinched at the cruelty when amplified through speakers. The attorney asked Captain Blake, "Can you describe your physical condition after the fall?" My breath caught, but I spoke steadily. Difficulty breathing, pain in my left side, a crack in my rib confirmed by CT scan. I paused, knowing the next words mattered. I could not stand without assistance. I heard someone in the back gasp softly. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe someone who once believed Linda's version of events. The attorney asked, "Did Mr. Blake attempt to help you?" I swallowed. "No." He mocked me. "Did he push you intentionally?" I answered with the same honesty I carried through every deployment. He made contact with my shoulder, and then I fell. The defense attorney rose, trying to salvage something. "Captain Blake, is it possible you slipped on the wet patio?" "Yes," I said. "It is possible, but the contact contributed." He pressed again. "Are you saying he assaulted you?" I kept my tone level. "I am saying the fall was preventable and that after I fell, he did nothing to help. The truth did not need embellishment. It stood on its own." When I stepped down from the stand, I felt a strange calm settle inside me, like a door had finally been closed after years of being left open in the wind. Ethan was asked to speak. His voice cracked. "I did not mean to hurt her, I swear. I was not thinking." The judge looked at him for a long moment with an expression that balanced authority and disappointment. Mr. Blake's intent is not a shield from consequence. Actions matter. Behavior matters. He announced the decision clearly. Probation, 12 months. Mandatory counseling for anger management. Community service hours. A no harassment order toward me. The courtroom murmured. Ethan's shoulders sagged. Linda covered her mouth to hold in a sob. There was no triumph in me, only a stillness that felt like justice settling in the right place. After the hearing, neighbors approached me quietly. A woman who had always believed every word Linda said touched my arm gently. "I am so sorry. I did not know." A man who used to praise Ethan's workouts sighed heavily. "You handled yourself with dignity, Captain. The legal punishment meant something, but the social one was larger." Word spread quickly that the Blake family had crossed a line that community values did not forgive easily. Linda returned to the dental clinic the following week, but her reception was ice cold. Patients refused appointments with her. Staff avoided her in the break room. By the end of the month, she was officially let go. The reason listed was loss of patient trust. In a place like Killeen, reputation is half the paycheck. She had none left. Ethan struggled even more. Every gym he applied to had seen the video. Nobody wanted to hire someone associated with public mistreatment of a service member, especially in a military town. His world shrank until it was only their house and the small yard behind it. Meanwhile, my life expanded. It surprised me how much kindness appeared once people saw the truth. Soldiers on base nodded a little longer when I passed. A young private approached me after a training briefing saying, "Ma'am, my sister went through something similar. The way you handled this gave me courage to speak up." That meant more than any court ruling. It meant something shifted beyond my small circle. Something rippled outward in ways I had never expected. One afternoon at the commissary, an older veteran stopped beside me. His hair was white. his posture stiff with old injuries. He said quietly, "I saw the footage. You carried yourself like a soldier should." He nodded once and walked away, leaving me with a warmth I had not felt in a long time. Without meaning to, without trying, I had become something in the eyes of the community, a symbol not of loud strength, but of quiet endurance, silent resilience. People stopped seeing me as the stepdaughter who never fit the Blake family mold. They started seeing me as Captain Rowan Blake, the officer who endured humiliation, stayed steady, told the truth, and let justice take its natural path. The contrast between my stillness and Linda's chaos only widened as the months passed. She avoided community gatherings. She stopped posting online. She shrank into the small corners of town where people had short memories. But this town did not forget. Not this time. Ethan avoided me entirely. If he drove past me on the road, he looked straight ahead, gripping the wheel until his knuckles turned white. Once I saw him at a gas station. He turned and walked away, leaving his pump still running. And me. I walked out of court that day straighter than I had walked into it. The weight of years of silence lifted, the weight of truth finally carried by the right shoulders. I did not need revenge. I did not need applause. I had resilience. And for the first time in my life, people finally saw it. Healing was not a moment. It was a process that moved slow and steady, like the Texas wind pushing through stubborn summer heat. After the court hearing and the formal closeout of the CID report, the Army finally cleared me to start physical therapy for my ribs and shoulder. The medical staff at Carl R. Darnall Army Medical Center had been professional throughout, but now that the case was over, there was a different warmth in the way they treated me, a respect that came not from rank, but from endurance. My first appointment was in a small therapy room on the second floor full of resistance bands, balance pads, and the faint smell of rubbing alcohol. The therapist, Sergeant First Class Mira Johnson, greeted me with a firm handshake. She had seen hundreds of soldiers with all kinds of injuries, but when she looked at my chart, she raised her eyebrows. "You held up pretty well, Captain. This recovery is not going to be fun, but you will get through it." And I believed her, not because her words were comforting, but because for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone was speaking to me, not around me. Therapy hurt. Every stretch felt like reopening a wound. Every breath pulled against the bruising. Every movement reminded me of the fall and the years of carrying tension I had never spoken out loud. But SFC Johnson pushed me with the same calm, steady force she had likely used on dozens of wounded soldiers from deployments before mine. The physical pain slowly gave way to control, then to strength, then to something I had not felt in years, freedom. My breathing returned to normal. My ribs healed cleanly. My shoulder regained mobility. The first time I reached overhead without flinching, I almost cried from relief. But physical therapy was only one part of the recovery. The Army required mental health follow-ups for anyone involved in a traumatic incident, especially when the injury involved family. At first, I dreaded those sessions, but they turned out to be the anchor I needed. The psychologist, Major Elena Ward, was calm, soft-spoken, and sharp as a blade when she needed to be. Her office was quiet, with framed certificates lining the wall and a small plant on her desk that somehow never wilted. She asked me things nobody in my family had ever cared enough to ask. When did you learn to stay silent? What did you believe would happen if you finally spoke? What did you lose in those years of shrinking yourself? Each question felt like peeling away armor I had welded on since I was a kid. There were days I hated the sessions because they made me remember things I had buried. Moments when Linda dismissed me at 14 years old, calling me dramatic for crying after my mother's memorial. Moments when Ethan mocked me for joining the Army, claiming I only wanted attention. Moments when my father stood by, hands in pockets, watching without stepping in. All those years of silencing myself so the house would stay calm. Major Ward never rushed me. She let me unravel slowly until the truth settled like dust on the table. Silence was not survival, it was surrender. And I was done surrendering. As weeks turned into months, something inside me shifted. My posture changed, my tone steadied. I spoke without shrinking. Soldiers in my unit noticed it first. A specialist approached me after a briefing. "Ma'am, you seem different, stronger." I smiled at that because he was right. I was different, not harder, not colder, just clearer. Around that time, the promotion board results came in. I had submitted my file months earlier, long before the fall, thinking nothing would come of it. But the Army sees what families sometimes refuse to acknowledge. My brigade commander called me into his office. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a desk cluttered with maps of flight corridors. "Captain Blake, I have good news. You have been selected for promotion to major." For a second, I just stared at him, the words taking longer to reach me than they should have. Promotion to O4 was not just a milestone. It was validation. It was every deployment, every evacuation mission, every early morning briefing, every late-night checklist, every sacrifice, and every scar finally recognized. "Congratulations, Major," he said, standing to offer his hand. "You earned this." When I stepped outside into the bright Texas sunlight, it felt like breathing new air. Not borrowed, not forced, mine. The insignia changed on my uniform a few weeks later, but the shift inside me happened long before that moment. With the promotion came new opportunities. One afternoon, Colonel Hayes from the Aviation Safety Office called me into a meeting. He explained that the office was looking for officers with operational experience and steady judgment. "Your record stands out, Major Blake. You have been recommended for an assignment on our safety review team." It was one of the most respected roles in Army aviation, ensuring aircraft protocols were safe and missions operated flawlessly. Being recommended for it meant the leadership trusted my eyes, my instincts, my integrity. I accepted. The work was demanding and detailed, but it reminded me of why I joined aviation in the first place. The sound of engines no longer felt like an escape. It felt like purpose. My balance began returning piece by piece. Physically, my ribs healed fully by month 4. My breathing returned to normal. My shoulder regained full rotation. Mentally, the progress was slower, more invisible but steady. I learned how to speak before the silence swallowed me. I learned how to step back without collapsing. I learned how to hold my own ground. One evening, after a long day of training reviews, I sat alone on the flight line watching the sunset bleed across the runway, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Helicopters were parked in 2 long rows, their silhouettes sharp against the light. The smell of fuel drifted lightly through the air, familiar and strangely comforting. For years, I believed this place had saved me from my home life. Now, I realized I had saved myself by refusing to let my past define my service or my future. My father reached out again, not with excuses, but with acknowledgement. He called one night, voice softer than I remembered. "Rowan, I saw your promotion post on Base News. I am proud of you. It was simple. It was late. It was imperfect. But it was real. I accepted it without reopening old wounds. Not forgiveness. Just release." Linda never contacted me again. Ethan kept his distance. The no harassment order remained in place. Their world moved without me, and mine moved without them. As fall settled across Texas and the summer heat finally broke, I felt something I had never felt growing up in that house. Peace, not the fragile kind, not the kind you hold by staying quiet, but the kind you build from truth. The kind you earn, the kind no one can take away. On the morning I officially signed into the Aviation Safety Office, I walked across the tarmac with steady steps. Soldiers saluted. Crew chiefs waved. A young lieutenant hurried past me carrying a binder and whispered, "Congratulations, ma'am." The wind carried warm air across the field, rustling the flags near the hangar. I paused for a moment, letting the scene settle inside me. This was my life, my work, my dignity, my identity. And I had reclaimed all of it. Healing did not erase what happened. It did not rewrite the past, but it gave me the strength to walk into my future without dragging old chains behind me. I was Major Rowan Blake, United States Army Aviation, not the stepdaughter who fell, not the woman who stayed silent, not the victim of someone else's cruelty. I had risen, and I was not going back. 1 year later, the air at Fort Cavazos felt different. Not lighter exactly, but clearer, as if the dust storms that once blurred everything inside me had finally settled. The Texas autumn carried a calmer wind than summer, a soft, steady breeze that brushed across the flight line and tugged gently at the edges of my uniform. I stood near the helicopter landing zone, watching the last rays of sunlight stretch long across the concrete. The hum of distant rotors vibrated faintly through the ground, a familiar pulse like the heartbeat of a place that had shaped me more than any home ever had. 1 year. 12 months since the fall. 12 months since the courtroom. 12 months since I stopped living small. I closed my eyes, letting the wind move across my face. The breeze tasted like dust and jet fuel and the promise of something new. I thought about Linda first. Not with anger anymore, not even with resentment, just clarity. She had tried reaching out once through a mutual friend who said Linda was struggling with the aftermath of everything, losing her job, losing the community's trust, losing the ability to pretend. I did not respond. There was nothing left to say. Some relationships are not meant to be repaired because they were never real to begin with. I had spent too many years shrinking myself to fit into a version of family that never had space for me. Letting that go was not cruelty. It was survival. Then I thought of Ethan. Word around town was that he completed his counseling program and avoided any further legal trouble. He applied to a few gyms outside Bell County, trying to rebuild his name in places where the video had not circulated as widely. I hoped he learned something not for his sake, but for whoever crossed his path next. Growth is not guaranteed, but accountability cracks open the door. Whether he walked through it or not was his choice, not my burden. In the early morning before work, I sometimes saw my reflection in the mirror and realized I no longer braced myself for the day the way I used to. My shoulders no longer carried invisible weight. My breath no longer hitched at memories. The scars were still present, but they no longer dictated the direction of my life. They simply reminded me of the roads I had already survived. The Army had become more of a home during this year than my childhood house ever had. My new role in the Aviation Safety Office challenged me daily, reviewing flight mishap reports, conducting safety assessments, advising commanders on operational risk. My opinion mattered here. My experience mattered. People listened when I spoke not because they felt obligated, but because they trusted my judgment. And that trust healed something deeper than the bruising on my ribs ever had. One afternoon, while reviewing flight readiness documentation, a young captain named Harris approached me. "Ma'am, do you have a minute?" He looked nervous in the way junior officers often did when seeking advice. I nodded and he stepped closer. "Mom, I heard about your case last year." He paused carefully. "My sister is dealing with something similar. She is scared to speak up. I am trying to help, but I do not know what to say." I closed the report and looked at him fully. Tell her truth has weight, but silence has chains. Tell her she gets to decide which she wants to carry. His eyes softened with understanding. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." After he left, I sat quietly absorbing the moment. 1 year ago, I could not have spoken those words. 1 year ago, I would have questioned whether my truth mattered enough. 1 year ago, I would have chosen silence because it felt easier, safer, familiar. Not anymore. Near dusk, the sky shifted into a pale lavender glow, clouds streaking across the horizon like brush strokes. I walked toward the edge of the flight line, my boots crunching over gravel. Helicopters gleamed in the fading light, their metal skins reflecting the colors of sunset. UH-60s, CH-47s, birds that had carried teams into danger and brought them home again. I had flown in many of them over the years. I had trusted their engines more than I had ever trusted my own family. Standing there now, I realized why. Machines do not lie. Engines do not pretend. Aircraft respond to truth, precise inputs, measurable conditions, honest maintenance. They give back exactly what you give them. Human beings are rarely that simple. I rested a hand on my side where the fracture had healed months ago. The pain was gone, but the memory remained. Not a wound, a marker, a reminder. Sometimes the thing that breaks you is the same thing that frees you. A truck rolled by on the far side of the tarmac, carrying crew chiefs preparing for the next day's operations. One of them raised a hand to me in greeting. I lifted mine in return. This place had embraced me without asking me to be smaller, quieter, or apologetic. It had pushed me, tested me, demanded strength from me. but it had never demanded silence. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in richer shades of gold and rose, I thought about my father. Our relationship had settled into a quiet, careful rhythm. He called once every couple of weeks, now nothing dramatic. Just small updates, weather stories from his garden, old memories of my mother he wished he had shared sooner. He never mentioned Linda. He never defended her again. Maybe that was his apology. Maybe that was enough. Healing does not always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it is simply the absence of old harm. I stood there breathing in the warm evening air, feeling the earth hum beneath me and the wind tug lightly at my uniform. A gentle peace wrapped around me, not fragile, not tentative, but earned. Hard, earned. For so long I believed silence protected me. Silence avoided conflict. Silence preserved family. Silence kept the roof from shaking loose. But silence had never protected me. It had only protected them. The ones who laughed, the ones who dismissed, the ones who called me dramatic, the ones who used my quiet as a shield for their own cruelty. I felt the truth settle inside me with the firmness of stone. Silence did not protect me, but truth did. I whispered the words into the wind, letting them drift across the runway into the open sky. Saying them out loud felt like placing the final piece of a puzzle that had taken 34 years to assemble. Behind me, the lights on the flight line buzzed to life, casting long shadows across the concrete. Soldiers moved through the amber glow, completing evening checks. The base hummed with familiar energy. A place built on order, discipline, resilience. A place that mirrored exactly what I had finally become. For a moment, I simply stood there letting everything settle. The past, the fall, the courtroom, the healing, the promotion, the new path ahead. No part of the journey had been easy, but none of it had been wasted. The truth had cut deep. The truth had burned. But the truth had rebuilt me stronger than silence ever had. The wind picked up, and the distant thrum of helicopter blades echoed faintly, carrying forward everything I had learned, everything I had become, everything I had reclaimed. I squared my shoulders, felt the weightless freedom of standing fully in myself, and walked back toward the hangar, ready for whatever came next. The sky behind me stretched wide and unbroken, and for the first time in my entire life, I matched it. I closed the small velvet box gently, letting it rest in my hands for a moment before I slipped it into my locker at the aviation safety office. The coin inside glinted faintly under the overhead lights, even through the thin crack of the lid. A simple token, nothing more than carved metal pressed and polished. Yet, somehow, it carried the weight of every step I had taken this past year. I stood still in the quiet of the office, feeling my heartbeat settle. Outside, I could hear the hum of evening briefings, the low thrum of distant rotors, the faint echo of boots moving across the hallway. Life on base never truly stopped. But something inside me had paused, shifted, cleared. I let out a long breath. Not shaky, not forced, not defensive, just breath. Real breath. For years, I had worn silence the way other people wore armor, a shield, a mask, a boundary I thought kept me safe. But it had never been protection. It had been permission. Permission for others to cross my lines. Permission for cruelty to hide behind family. Permission for disrespect to become a routine instead of a warning. The fall at that barbecue had shattered more than my ribs. It had shattered the idea that silence ever served me. Truth had been the thing that saved me. Truth had been the thing that rebuilt me. Truth had lifted me into the person I was always meant to be. I stepped outside into the late afternoon light. The sky was wide open, stretched across Fort Cavazos in soft gold. Soldiers were heading toward the dining facility. Others walked into the gym. A few helicopters rolled across the tarmac blades, beginning to rotate dust swirling up around their landing skids. Everything moved with purpose. Everything had direction. For the first time in my life, so did I. The wind picked up, brushing across my shoulders like a quiet acknowledgement of the road that brought me here. I thought of everyone who had watched my journey from the outside without ever knowing the full truth. The neighbors, the soldiers, the co-workers, the people who saw the fall but did not understand what had lived behind it. And then I thought of the people watching now through this story, people who knew what it meant to endure silently for years, people who had stayed quiet to keep the peace, people who had swallowed their hurt because someone else told them it was easier that way, people who had been laughed at while they were hurting. I imagined them sitting somewhere across the country, maybe in a living room in Ohio, or a porch in Georgia, or a quiet apartment in Seattle, leaning closer to the screen as they listened to the last piece of my story. And I felt the weight of what I needed to say to them, not as a soldier, not as an officer, not as someone who won a case or earned a promotion, but as someone who finally stopped letting silence be the language of her life. I walked toward the edge of the flight line, stopping where the concrete met the gravel. The wind pressed lightly against my uniform. The sky stretched open in front of me, and I spoke not loudly, but with a steadiness that came from every lesson this past year carved into me. If you have ever been laughed at while you were hurting, I want you to hear me now. You did not imagine it. You did not exaggerate it. You did not deserve it. The people who mocked you were not strong. They were comfortable in your silence, and they counted on you to stay small so they would never need to look at themselves. I had stayed small for most of my life. I had stayed silent for years, believing it made me easier to love, easier to manage, easier to keep. But silence is not kindness. Silence is not peace. Silence is not strength. Silence is the slow erosion of everything that keeps you whole. And truth, even when it is hard, even when it shakes the walls of your world, even when it costs you people you thought were family, truth is what saves you. Truth is what lifts you. Truth is what clears the air you breathe. I took another breath and let the wind carry it forward as if it could reach somebody far beyond the base. Someone sitting behind a screen, wondering if they should finally speak. A year ago, I would have whispered this. Today, I say it clearly. Loud silence protects those who harm you. Truth protects you. And you deserve protection. If you are watching this from somewhere far from Texas, maybe from across the country, maybe from another coast, maybe from a quiet town like the one I grew up in, I want you to know this too. You are not alone in what you felt. You are not the only one who stayed quiet to keep the peace. You are not the only one who convinced yourself the pain was easier than the confrontation. You are not the only one who thought speaking up would make everything worse. I thought that too, and I was wrong. The moment I told the truth, the moment I stood in myself instead of behind myself, was the moment everything changed. Not instantly, not magically, but steadily. Change came in the form of justice, healing, promotion, respect, and above all, peace. The kind of peace that does not demand silence. The kind of peace that can stand in the open without fear. I looked across the runway, watching a Black Hawk lift off the ground, rising slow at first, then steady, then strong. The rotors kicked dust across the field, creating a storm of golden particles in the sun's fading light. It reminded me of how growth feels from the inside. Chaotic at first, blinding, uncomfortable. But once you rise, there is clarity. There is view. There is truth. I turned back toward the camera of this story, imagined the face of the person watching, leaning in, waiting for the final words, and I asked them the question I wished someone had asked me years ago. Have you ever been laughed at when you were hurting? And if so, what did you do? Did you stay quiet? Did you swallow the pain? Did you hide it because someone told you it was easier that way? Or did you finally speak? Did you finally rise? Did you finally choose yourself? I lifted my chin, feeling the last weight of the year fall away like dust from my boots. Your story matters, your voice matters, your truth matters, and sometimes the smallest moment when you dare to speak for yourself changes everything around you. If you are watching this right now, wherever you are, I want you to tell me where you are watching from. Tell me your city, your time, your place in the world, because your voice belongs in this story too. And tell me what you would have done standing where I stood, bleeding, bruised, humiliated, but still breathing, still capable of choosing truth instead of silence. What would you have done? What will you do now? The wind shifted again, warm and steady across the base, as if the air itself was waiting for an answer. I gave the camera one last look, calm, certain ready. Silence did not protect me, but truth did, and it will protect you too. Now tell me where you are watching from and what you would have done, because your voice deserves to be heard just as much as mine.